The candle in the archive guttered, and in that brief failing of light, Duchess Seraphine Vale heard her own name spoken by a man who had been dead for 12 years. She did not hear a voice, of course. She heard the dry whisper of paper turning beneath the steward's hand, and on that paper, in ink gone brown as old blood, her name was written in a script she knew too well. The steward did not understand what he had found. He only knew that something in the lowest vault of Brackenmere Hall had been sealed for a very long time, and that the new survey of the duchy's records required it opened. He held the letter toward the lamp and said, "Your Grace, this one bears the old Duke's seal. Shall I add it to the register?" "No," Seraphine said, and the calm of her voice astonished her. "Give it to me. I will see to it myself." The year was 1847. For 12 of those years she had waited, half in dread and half in a strange, exhausted hope, for this exact moment. She had imagined it so often that the reality felt almost gentle. She took the letter, and her gloved fingers did not tremble because she had spent a great portion of her life teaching them not to. Outside the narrow window, the silver cliffs of Valemere Haven fell away to a sea the colour of cold pewter, and the wild lavender on the moors above the estate bent flat under a wind that smelled of salt and rain. This was a beautiful and secretive country, a duchy folded between water and stone, where the great houses kept their scandals the way the cliffs kept the tide, patiently and without mercy. And no house kept a darker secret than the house of Ardyn, into which Seraphine had married 13 years before, when she was a girl of 22, who believed that loving a good man would be a simple thing. She climbed the worn stair from the vault with the letter pressed against her ribs, and she thought of her husband. Duke Corwin Ardyn was at that hour standing in the long gallery of the principal seat, beneath the painted faces of men who would not have received him at their tables. He was a tall man of 42, with the kind of face that grief had carved rather than ruined, dark hair gone grey at the temples, and eyes that held a permanent question no one had answered for him. He had learned to stand very still in rooms because stillness drew less attention than movement, and a man accused of betraying his own blood learns quickly that attention is a knife. What no one knew, not even his wife, was the thing he was ashamed of above all others. There had been a winter, the 5th or 6th of his disgrace, when the whispers had grown so constant and so certain that Corwin had begun in the small hours to wonder whether they might be true. Not in fact, for he knew what he had and had not done, but in some deeper way. He had begun to wonder whether a man who was hated by everyone he had ever known might not, after all, deserve it. He had drunk a great deal that winter. He had said cruel things to Seraphine that he did not mean and could not later unsay, had accused her of staying with him only for the title, had once told her that her silence at his table was the silence of a jailer rather than a wife. She had not answered him. She had only looked at him with a steadiness that he had mistaken for coldness, and that look had shamed him into sobriety, and he had never spoken of that winter again. But he carried it. A man may be innocent of the crime the world accuses him of and still be guilty of smaller private ruins, and Corwin Ardyn knew the exact shape of his. A footman announced a visitor, and the visitor did not wait to be received. "They are saying it again in the town," said Lord Aldous Ardyn, sweeping in with the ease of a man who has never once feared a closed door. He was Corwin's uncle, a broad and handsome figure of nearly 60, with silver hair and a smile that arrived a moment before his eyes did. "They are saying the cursed Duke walked the cliff road at night. You must be more careful with the talk, nephew. Scandal is like damp. It rots the timbers before you ever see the stain." "Then it is fortunate that the house is already rotten," Corwin said quietly. "What do you want, uncle?" "To help you, as always." Aldous spread his hands. "The council meets within the fortnight. There is pressure, real pressure, to settle the succession at last, to place the duchy in steady hands. You have no son. You have a wife who barely speaks to you. The line must go somewhere, Corwin, and the family would rather it went to me than to a man the whole coast believes a traitor. There it was, laid down soft as a glove on a table. Corwin understood it perfectly. For 12 years his uncle had circled the dukedom the way a gull circles a wounded thing on the rocks, waiting, patient, certain. You have wanted this house since before my father was cold, Corwin said. I have wanted what is best for it. Aldous smiled, but for just a moment something flickered behind the smile, something older and more tired than ambition. You think me a simple thief, nephew. You always have. You never once asked why a younger son might spend his whole life reaching for a thing he was told from the cradle would never be his. Your grandfather gave your father everything and gave me a horse and his blessing. I have watched this family squander what I was never allowed to touch. I have wanted what is best for it. There is a difference, though I would not expect a man in your position to see it clearly. When he was gone, Corwin stood alone among the portraits, and he did not move for a long time. That evening, husband and wife dined together for the first time in many weeks. They lived under one roof and met like courteous strangers, two people who had once shared everything and now shared only the careful management of silence. The great dining hall of Everdawn Manor, the smaller house above the sea where they kept their private life, was lit by a single branch of candles, and beyond the tall glass of the conservatory door, the cultivated garden glowed faintly, lamps set among the late roses. Seraphine had decided, somewhere on the stair from the vault, what she would do. She had decided 100 times and unmade the decision 100 more. But she set the letter beside her plate, and she watched her husband's face when he saw the seal. He went pale. "Where did you get that?" he said. "Brackenmere, the lowest vault. The steward found it in the survey." She kept her voice level. "It is in your father's hand, Corwin. It is addressed to me. To you." He set down his glass very carefully. "He never trusted you with anything. He thought you a pretty fortune I had married against his wishes. He told me as much." "I know what he told you," she said. "He told me a great many other things, read it, but he did not reach for it. Instead, he looked at her across the candlelight with an expression she had not seen on him in years, something raw breaking the surface of his composure, and he said, 'If I read that, everything changes. You know it does. You have known it longer than I have. 12 years you have sat at my table and let the whole world call me a thief of my own blood, and you have said nothing. Why now, Seraphine? Why tonight?'" The accusation was fair, and it struck the place in her that had never healed. She had loved this man once with a completeness that frightened her, and she had watched that love starve over 12 years of careful silence. And the worst of it was that he believed her silence had been indifference, when in truth it had been the heaviest loyalty of her life. "Because I made a promise," she said, "and the man I made it to is named in that letter. And I think the time the promise was meant to buy has run out." He reached for the letter then. His hand stopped just short of it. "Tell me one thing first," he said. "Did you ever believe it? What they say I did, setting aside the true heir to take the title for myself. Did you, in any hour of these 12 years, believe me capable of it?" And Seraphine, who had guarded one truth so long that it had nearly hollowed her, found that she could at last give him a smaller one. "No," she said, "not for a single hour. I have always known you did not do it. I have simply never been free to say who did." "And yet," Corwin said, very low, "there was a winter when I half believed it of myself. You remember it. You remember the things I said to you. If you knew all that time that I was innocent, why did you let me drown in it? One word from you that winter would have kept me from becoming a man I am still ashamed of." It was the cruelest thing he could have said, and the most honest, and Seraphine flinched as though struck. "You think I do not know that," she said. "You think I have not lain awake on every one of those nights. I had a child's life weighed against your peace, Corwin, and I chose the child again and again, and I would choose him again. But do not imagine it cost me nothing to watch you suffer and stay silent. It is the great wound of my life that I could not save you from that winter. Do not use it now as a blade." For a moment they only looked at one another, the old distance between them suddenly full of everything they had never said. Then Corwin lowered his eyes, ashamed, and broke the seal. The hand was unmistakably his father's, the old Duke Reynold Ardyn, who had died in the autumn of 1835, in the same dark season that had taken so much else. The letter was dated 3 days before his death. Corwin read it once in silence, and then he read it again aloud, slowly, as a man reads something he does not wish to be alone with. His father wrote that he was dying. He wrote that he had done a terrible thing in his weakness, and that he wished it undone. He wrote of Corwin's elder half-brother, Lord Gideon, who by every law of the duchy should have inherited, and of Gideon's infant son, born that very year, a boy who was the truest heir Valemere Haven possessed. And he wrote that there were men in the family who had decided the child must never be acknowledged, and that they had moved against Gideon to be certain of it. Corwin's voice failed at the next lines. Seraphine finished them from memory because she had read this letter once before, long ago, in a darker room. "He writes," she said softly, "that he was too great a coward to stop them while he lived. That he places the child's life in your hands and in mine because we are the only two he trusts, and that he begs your forgiveness for the burden and for the lie he let grow over you, which he calls the shape of his cowardice. He signs it with his whole name." The candles burned. Far below the windows, the sea went on with its old, indifferent work against the cliffs. "Gideon died of a fall," Corwin said at last, in the flat voice of a man assembling a thing he has long refused to look at. "On the Cliff Road, in November. His wife, Lady Marianne, died of fever a week after. The child was said to have died with her. There was a small grave. I stood beside it. My uncle stood beside it and wept, and I thought, even hating him, that perhaps grief had at last made him human." He raised his eyes. "There was no child in that grave, was there?" "No," said Seraphine. "There was not." She rose from the table. She walked to the conservatory door and laid her hand against the cold glass, and the garden lamps lit her face from below, and she told him the thing she had carried for 12 years. "Your uncle had Gideon killed," she said. "It was made to look a fall, but a man was paid, and that man drank, and a drunk man talks. Marianne did not die of fever. She died because she would not stop demanding justice for her husband and her son, and she made herself dangerous, and so she was made quiet. Those are the innocent lives your family's honor was built upon, Corwin. A brother, his wife, and nearly a child of 1 year. Nearly, he repeated. Your father came to me 3 days before he died. To me because no one watched the foolish young Duchess, because I was beneath their notice, and that was the only thing in those days that kept me safe and useful. He gave me the letter you hold, and he gave me the boy. He said your uncle would never suspect that the child had been hidden by the wife everyone discounted. He made me swear to keep the boy alive and unknown until it was safe to bring the truth into the light. And he made me swear something else. He made me swear that I would not tell you. Not tell me. Corwin stood. My own father forbade you to tell me that my brother was murdered and his son alive. He feared for you, Seraphine said, and now her own composure thinned. He believed rightly that if you knew, you would confront Aldous at once, openly, with all your honor and no proof, and that you would die the way Gideon died, on some convenient road, and that the child would die with you. He believed that the only protection the boy had was that you also believed him dead. Your grief had to be real, Corwin. Your disgrace had to be real. The whole coast had to believe the curse of the traitor Duke, because while they looked at you, no one looked at a quiet woman with a ward in a far house. Your shame was the wall I built around that child. I have hated it every day. I have watched it eat you, and I could not stop because the moment I spoke, I gambled his life." For a long moment, Corwin said nothing at all. When he spoke, his voice was very low. "The boy," he said, "he is alive. He would be 12 years old." "He is 12, said Seraphine. "His name is Tristan. He has your brother's hands and your brother's stubbornness, and he has been told that his parents died of fever and that I am a distant cousin who keeps him from charity. He does not know what he is. He lives at the old grange beyond the lavender moor, with a tutor and a woman I would trust with my own breath. I have seen him grow from a child who could not walk into a boy who argues with me about the tides." Her voice caught. "I have loved him as my own, Corwin, and I have never once been able to tell the man I married that I had a son to love at all." And Corwin Arden, who had stood still in so many cruel rooms, crossed the floor and took his wife by both hands, and the years of careful distance cracked between them like ice on a thaw. "We were guarding the same fire from opposite sides of the wall," he said. "All this time, I thought you despised me for what the family had done. You thought I might have done it, and neither of us could speak." "Yes," she whispered. "Then let us stop being silent," Corwin said. "Together, whatever it costs." But the cost, when it came, would be hers far more than his, and they both knew it before they said another word. They began that night, in the conservatory beneath the glowing glass, with the letter between them on a small iron table and the late roses breathing in the warm, damp air. They were not yet at ease with one another. 12 years of distance does not dissolve in an evening, and there were moments when Corwin looked at Seraphine as though he were meeting a stranger who happened to wear his wife's face. But they were, for the first time in a long time, on the same side. And that was a kind of intimacy more dangerous than any other. "The letter alone is not enough," Corwin said, pacing the brick path between the planters. "It is my father's word against my uncle's standing, and Aldous will say a dying man's mind wandered. He will say I forged it myself to clear my name. He will turn it against us within an hour." "Then we need more," Seraphine said. "There were documents. When your uncle had Tristan declared no true heir, he did not merely speak it. He produced papers, a record that the marriage of Gideon and Marian had been irregular, a statement from a clergyman since dead that the child was born outside the church. All forged, I have always believed. But forgery leaves a trail, Corwin. Forgers are paid, witnesses are bought, and the man who arranges such things keeps proof, because proof is how he keeps the men he has bought from turning on him." "You are describing my uncle's strong room at Brackenmere," Corwin said slowly. "I am." He stopped pacing. "Then we are speaking of theft from a man who has already murdered twice to protect this secret." "I am aware of the arithmetic," Seraphine said. "I have lived inside it for 12 years. What followed was the most dangerous fortnight of either of their lives, and it remade them as surely as it endangered them. They could not move openly. The whole country watched the cursed Duke. That was the cruel genius of Aldous' design, and now it became their obstacle. So they moved, as they had once moved as young lovers, in stolen hours and quiet places, except that now the stakes were a child's life and a man's honor rather than the mere fluttering of 2 hearts. Seraphine learned again the particular set of her husband's shoulders when he was thinking. Corwin learned, with a grief that was almost unbearable, exactly how strong his wife had become in the years he had spent believing her cold. And yet the old wound between them was not so easily closed. 3 days into their search, it tore open again, and it nearly ruined everything. It happened over the question of the boy. Corwin, hungry now for the family that had been stolen from him, wanted to tell Tristan the truth at once, to take him from the Grange and bring him into the open. Seraphine refused him flatly. "You have known of his existence for 3 days," she said, "and already you would risk his life to satisfy your own heart. You have not earned the right to decide his fate, Corwin. I have spent 12 years earning it, and perhaps that is the trouble," he answered, his old bitterness rising before he could stop it. "Perhaps 12 years of deciding alone has taught you to trust no one, not even me. You guard that boy like a miser guards gold. You will not even let his own blood near him." The words landed, and he saw them land, and he would have given a great deal to call them back. Seraphine went very still. "His own blood," she repeated quietly, "very nearly murdered him in his cradle. Forgive me if I have learned to be careful of Arden men who feel entitled to a boy's life. You spent 1 winter doubting your own innocence. I have spent 12 years certain of a thing I could tell no one. Do not lecture me on trust." She gathered her shawl. "When you can think of him before yourself, we will speak again." She left him standing in the cold garden, and for a full day they did not speak, and in that day Corwin understood something he had been too proud to see. He had spent 12 years believing himself the one who suffered. He had never once truly reckoned with what those years had cost her. The loneliness of carrying a secret no one could share, the daily theft of her own marriage, the love she had poured into a child she could never publicly claim. When he came to her the next evening, he did not defend himself. "You were right," he said simply. "I was thinking of the brother I lost and the son I might have had, and not of the boy himself. I have spent so long being the one wronged that I forgot how to be the one who protects. Teach me how you have done it. I will follow your judgment in this, not my own." Something in Seraphine's face eased that had been tight for 12 years. "That," she said, "is the first time in a very long while that you have sounded like the man I married." It was that fragile, hard-won trust that carried them to the Grange at last, by her decision and on her terms after dark, so that Corwin might see the boy without endangering him. She brought him into a low, warm room where a fire burned, and a tall boy of 12 sat frowning over a book of charts. "Cousin Seraphine," the boy said, rising with the awkward courtesy of his age. And then, seeing Corwin, he straightened with sudden wariness. "You did not say you would bring anyone." "This is a friend," Seraphine said. "He wished to meet you. His name is Corwin." The boy studied the Duke with frank, unfrightened eyes, and Corwin studied him back, and for a moment the resemblance to Gideon was so strong that the older man could not speak. The boy had the Arden hands, broad and capable. He had Gideon's habit of tilting his head when curious. "You have the look of someone who has lost an argument tonight," Tristan said to Corwin, with the cheerful rudeness of a clever child. "Cousin Seraphine has that effect. She has never lost one in her life, I think." "She has lost a few," Corwin said, his voice rough. "She simply does not let you see it." When they rode home, Corwin was silent for a long while, and then he said, "He is everything Gideon would have wished. And he does not know his own name. We have stolen his whole world from him to keep him in it." "Yes," said Seraphine, "and when we give it back to him, we will throw his quiet life on the fire. He will become the truest heir to a duchy other men have killed for. He will be a target before he is a man. Do you understand now why I have hesitated for 12 years? It was never only your honor I weighed against the truth. It was his peace." "I understand," Corwin said. "But a peace built on a murdered father and a stolen name is a debt, Seraphine, not a gift. We will pay it. We will give him the choice his parents never had." They came at last to the strong room of Brackenmere Hall by a route that nearly undid them. It was Seraphine who found the way in, and the manner of it cost her dearly. The forger Aldous had used 12 years before was a man named Halloran, long since dead, But Halloran had had a daughter, a seamstress in the town, a woman of about Seraphine's own age, who remembered the Duchess only as a fine lady who had once paid a kindness when no one else would. Seraphine went to her alone against Corwin's wishes, and she did a thing she had sworn never to do. She told a portion of the truth to a stranger, and she placed the whole edifice of her 12 years' silence into the hands of a woman she could only hope to trust. "My father did wrong," the seamstress said, when she had heard enough. She was pale and frightened and angry. "He told me before he died that he had helped a great lord steal a child's birthright, and that the lord had paid him to keep papers safe, papers the lord did not dare destroy and did not dare lose. He told me where, your grace, because he wanted one honest soul to know in case the day ever came. I have carried it 8 years and wished I never had." "I know that wish," Seraphine said. "I have carried mine for 12. The papers were behind a false stone in the strongroom wall, exactly where the dead forger had hidden them, and they were everything Seraphine had hoped and feared. There were the true records of Gideon and Marian's marriage, properly witnessed in the church, which Aldous had paid to have suppressed and replaced. There was Aldous' own correspondence with the men he had hired, careful and damning, the words of a man who believed himself far too clever ever to be caught. And there was a single page that made Corwin sit down very suddenly when he read it, a page that turned the whole matter on its dark axis. It was a letter from Aldous to the now-dead clergyman, written in the autumn of 1835, and in it Aldous made plain that he intended not merely to set the boy aside, but to be rid of Corwin as well, in time, once the disgrace had done its work. The traitor Duke was never meant to keep his title. He was meant to wear the shame, to be hated, to be conveniently broken, and then to die without an heir, so that the dukedom would fall at last to Aldous and his sons as the only Ardins left untainted. "He let me live as bait," Corwin said quietly, "and he meant to collect me when the world had finished despising me." "And he very nearly did," said Seraphine. "If your father's letter had stayed in that vault 1 more year, if the council had settled the succession on him this fortnight, you would have been a loose thread, Corwin, and he does not leave loose threads." The twist in the whole affair, the thing neither of them had foreseen, came when they laid every paper out together on the conservatory table and read them in their proper order for the first time. For among the suppressed church records there was an entry Seraphine had never seen in the old clerk's careful hand, and it concerned not Gideon's marriage, but the old Duke's final act. 3 days before his death, Duke Reynold Ardin had quietly and lawfully entered an instrument of guardianship. He had named the infant Tristan, the heir presumptive of Valemere Haven, in proper form, witnessed and sealed, and he had named 2 guardians to hold that truth in trust until the boy came of age. The 2 guardians were his son Corwin and his son's wife Seraphine jointly, the one ignorant and the other silent, each chosen for exactly the role they had unknowingly played. "He did not only beg us to protect the boy," Seraphine breathed. "He made it law. He bound us together in the same act. Corwin, your father knew we had grown distant. He knew it would drive a wall between us, my silence. And he did it anyway, because he believed that the 2 of us, divided and grieving and bound by the same secret, were a stronger fortress than either of us could ever be alone." "He spent our marriage to save my brother's son," Corwin said. There was no bitterness in it now, only a vast and complicated grief. And he was right. That is the unbearable part. He was right. "Then let us not let it have been for nothing," Seraphine said. "The reckoning came at the council, before all the great families of the duchy, in the candlelit hall of the principal seat, beneath the portraits of men who had despised Corwin Ardin for 12 years. They had agreed on their order of battle. They would let Aldous speak, let him commit himself fully to his lie before all the families, and only then bring the papers forward, so that he would have no room to retreat. It was a sound plan. it very nearly was not enough. Lord Aldous Ardyn rose to make his case for the succession with the easy confidence of a man who had already won. He spoke of stability. He spoke with a sorrowing face, of his poor nephew's disgrace, of the curse upon the line, of the kindness it would be to let the dukedom pass at last into hands the people could trust. He was magnificent, and he was lying, and the room believed him, because the room had believed him for 12 years. Then Corwin stood, and beside him stood his wife, and that alone caused a murmur, for the cursed duke and his cold duchess had not been seen to stand together in living memory. "I have let you call me a traitor for 12 years, Corwin said, and the hall fell silent at the change in him, for there was no longer any question in his eyes. "I let you because I believed, until a fortnight ago, that my silence protected the innocent. I have since learned that I was kept in the dark not by my own choice, but by a dying man's love, and that the thing I protected was real, and that the man who built my disgrace built it as a grave he meant me to fall into. I will say now what I could not say before. I did not betray my bloodline. My bloodline was betrayed and sold and very nearly murdered to the last child by the man who stands before you asking for its inheritance. The papers were brought forward and laid before the council. The old duke's letter, the true marriage record, the lawful instrument of guardianship, and Aldous Ardyn's own correspondence in his own hand. For one moment, Aldous' composure broke, and in that moment he proved how dangerous a cornered man can be. He did not bluster, he moved. With a speed that belied his years, he swept the nearest candle from the table toward the loose papers, and a flame caught the edge of the old correspondence, his own damning letters, the one piece of evidence that could not be explained away as a dying man's confusion. Smoke curled up, men shouted. Aldous stood over the burning page with the steady look of a man who would rather destroy the truth than be ruled by it, and for one heartbeat it seemed he might yet win, for a confession in a dead man's hand can be doubted, but a confession in the living villain's own hand cannot, and that was the page now blackening on the table. It was Seraphine who moved. She did not cry out. She seized the burning papers in her bare hands and crushed the flame against her own palms, and she held the half-charred letters up before the whole council with her hands scorched and shaking, and her voice did not waver. "You will not burn this," she said to Aldous, "as you burned everything else. I have guarded these for 1 fortnight, and I guarded the truth they protect for 12 years, and I did not carry it through all of that to watch you set it alight in front of 50 witnesses. Read what is left, my lords. It is enough. It is more than enough." It was enough. The flame had taken the salutation and the date, but the body of the letter survived. Aldous' own plan to murder his way to the dukedom, written plainly in his own hand, and now witnessed by every great family of the coast who had seen him try to destroy it. A man does not fling himself upon a candle to burn an honest paper. His act had condemned him more surely than the words themselves. And then Seraphine paid the price she had dreaded for 12 years, and she paid it without flinching. "There is one proof more," she said, her scorched hands held before her, and her clear voice cut through the smoke and the noise. The heir of Valemere Haven did not die in the autumn of 1835. I have kept him alive and hidden these 12 years, by the charge of the late Duke, and at the cost of my own good name and my own marriage. He is a boy of 12. He is in this house tonight, and he is the truest Ardyn among us." She had given up everything in that sentence, the safety she had built, the quiet life, the invisibility that had been the boy's whole armor. From this moment the child would be known, and watched, and weighed, and never again wholly safe in the simple way that ordinary children are. She had carried that armor for 12 years, and now, before all these cold and powerful faces, she set it down. And when the door opened, and a tall boy of 12 walked into the hall with Gideon's hands and Gideon's tilt of the head, the men who had known his father went white. and Lord Aldous Ardyn understood at last that he had lost. He did not go quietly. Men of his kind never do. There were denials and threats, and the forger's own daughter rose and named the false documents he had once made, and the old clerk's records could not be unmade, and the boy's living face was a witness no lie could answer. But at the very end, as the guards came toward him, Aldous turned not to the council but to Corwin, and for the first time the smile was wholly gone. "You think this was only greed," he said. "You will tell yourself that, because it is simpler. But I was the son they gave nothing to, and your father was the son they gave the world. I told myself for 40 years that I would set it right, that I deserved it, that the family would be better in my hands. A man can talk himself into anything if he begins with a true wound. Remember that, nephew, the next time you are certain of your own righteousness." Then the guards had him, and the long, patient crime of 12 years collapsed under the weight of a single letter that had waited in a vault for someone brave enough to open it, and the courage of a woman willing to burn her own hands to keep it. It would be pleasant to say that everything was made whole at once. It was not. Honor restored is not the same as a heart restored, and Corwin and Seraphine still had between them the wreckage of 12 silent years, and now the memory of cruel words traded in a cold garden. But late that night, when the hall had emptied and the great house had gone quiet, they walked together into the glass conservatory of Everdawn Manor, where the lamps glowed among the late roses, and the dark sea murmured below the cliffs. Seraphine's hands were wrapped in clean linen. Corwin had bound them himself, with a tenderness that neither of them had known how to speak of for years. "You might have lost those hands," he said, "for a sheaf of paper." "For the truth," she answered, "and for you. They are not so different to me now as they once were." They did not speak for a while. They had spoken so much and to so many that silence had become a relief rather than a wound. "You gave him up tonight," Corwin said at last. "The safe life, everything you protected, and you nearly gave your own hands besides. You set it all on the fire in front of 50 men who would gladly have seen us both ruined." "I did," said Seraphine. "Why?" She looked at him in the warm light, and the careful Duchess, who had survived 12 years by trembling at nothing, allowed herself for once to be simply a woman who had been very tired and very alone for a very long time. "Because you asked me to stop being silent," she said. "And because I was so weary of loving you from behind a wall. I have loved you the whole time, Corwin. Through every year you thought I was cold. I loved you when I could not tell you why I would not meet your eyes, and I loved you when you flinched from the talk in the town, and I loved you most of all on the nights you stood in the gallery, believing yourself a traitor, when I knew the truth and could not give it to you. I have been faithful to a promise that asked me to seem faithless to you, and I am done, whatever the cost. I would rather have you and have nothing else than keep every safe thing and lose you again." "That winter," Corwin said, and his voice was unsteady. "The things I said, the man I became, you never once threw them back at me, not even in the garden 3 days ago when I deserved it. Why?" "Because a man who hates himself does not need a wife to hate him too," she said gently. "He needs one who will wait for him to find his way back. I was waiting, Corwin. I have been waiting for 12 years. Corwin Ardyn crossed the warm, bright room and took his wife's bandaged face in his hands, as carefully as if she were made of the same glass that surrounded them, and this time there was no wall between them at all. "Then we will begin again," he said. "Not where we were. We cannot go back 12 years. But here, tonight, as two people who guarded the same fire and have at last walked around to the same side of the wall. I do not want the Duchess who survived. I want the woman who loved me through all of it, even the worst of me. I have wanted her the whole time, Seraphine, and I was too proud and too ashamed to reach for her. I am reaching now." She came into his arms as the sea spoke below them, and outside the glowing glass the lavender moor lay silver under the moon, and somewhere in that great house a boy of 12 slept under the protection of a name he had finally been given. The truth had cost them a fortune in fear and a dozen years of grief and the skin of her hands. But it had brought them back to one another, and that in the end was the only inheritance either of them had ever truly wanted. 4 springs later, the conservatory of Everdawn Manor was full of noise, which it had never been in all the years of silence before. Tristan Ardain, the acknowledged heir of Valemere Haven, was 16 now and very tall, and he was losing an argument about the tides to a small, dark-haired girl of 2 who did not understand a word he said and was delighted by all of them. The girl was Corwin and Seraphine's own daughter, born in the 2nd year after the truth, and she had her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet, watchful eyes. And she liked best of all to be carried into the conservatory at dusk to see the lamps lit among the roses. Corwin watched them from the doorway. He was 46 now, grey fully come to his dark hair, but the permanent question had at last gone out of his eyes. The country no longer spoke of a cursed duke. The country, in the way of countries, had quietly decided it had always known the truth and had always been on his side. And he let them keep the small lie because it harmed no one, and he had grown tired of the price of grand corrections. Seraphine came to stand beside him. She was 39, and there was grey in her hair too now, and a faint silver scarring across both her palms that she had never troubled to hide, and she wore all of it as plainly as everything else she had earned. "He asked me today whether he must become duke after you," she said, nodding toward the tall boy and the small girl. "He said it as though it were a sentence rather than an honor." "And what did you tell him?" "That his father and grandfather both wished it for him, and that wishing is not the same as commanding, and that he has years yet to decide what kind of man he means to be." She slipped her scarred hand into her husband's, and he closed his fingers gently over the old burns. "I told him that the title is only a thing other men have killed for. The life is what we make in spite of them." "You have grown wise," Corwin said. "I have grown old," she answered, smiling. "It is frequently mistaken for the same thing." Below them, the sea went on against the cliffs as it always had, patient and indifferent, keeping its secrets and surrendering them in its own time. But the house above it was no longer a place of silence. It was full of voices now, and arguments about the tides, and the small, bright laughter of a child who would never have to be hidden from anyone. And that was the truth they had won, not the kind that is written in vaults, but the kind that is lived, out loud, in the light. If this story moved you, stay for the next one, where another buried truth waits for someone brave enough to speak it.